Ever feel like you need, I don't know, a secret decoder ring for the world of cybersecurity? Like the language is just so dense, the threats are constant, and just staying informed feels like a full-time job sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge field, and it can definitely feel overwhelming.
Well, consider this your shortcut. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the very core of digital security. We're going to try and pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge you need.
Yeah, we'll explore everything from, those foundational concepts that underpin all security to the intricate dance of network defenses, the art of cryptography.
And even how organizations prepare for and respond to when things inevitably go wrong.
Exactly. Our mission with this deep dive really is to help you cut through the noise, understand the why and how behind security operations.
And hopefully equip you with those aha moments that make you feel truly well-informed, but, without the information overload.
You should gain some clear insights, maybe some surprising facts too, to navigate the digital landscape with a bit more confidence.
Okay, so thinking about digital security, it often feels like this huge, sprawling wilderness. But I've heard there's like a simple, powerful compass that guides all security decisions. Is that the famous CIA triad?
That's the one, absolutely. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And they're not just jargon, they really are the bedrock principles. They inform almost every security choice a company makes. If you compromise any one of those pillars, the entire structure of information security is weakened. It's fundamental.
So let's unpack that a bit, starting with confidentiality.
Yeah.
What are we really talking about when we say keeping secret secret? Sounds obvious.
Right. Confidentiality is all about making sure only authorized individuals, processes, or systems can actually access information. Think of it like a private conversation. You want to ensure only the intended listeners can hear it.
Okay.
A perfect real-world example is how virtual private networks, VPNs, work. When users in, say, different offices need to securely exchange files over the public internet, a VPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel. It's kind of like sending a sealed letter through a clear tube. The tube itself is visible, but the contents inside remain private, confidential.
That makes perfect sense. And when confidentiality is breached, that's where things get really problematic. Like, imagine a keylogger hidden on a CEO's laptop.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a direct assault on confidentiality, right? Designed specifically to capture sensitive information that should remain private.
Precisely. And it's not just about fancy tech either. Even something that seems, mundane, like a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. That's a powerful administrative control designed purely to protect confidentiality.
So it's a legal safeguard underpinning the technical ones.
Exactly. It sets the baseline expectation.
Got it. Okay, moving on to integrity. This one feels like it's about trust, maybe. About knowing your data hasn't been messed with.
You've hit on it exactly. Integrity means protecting information from unauthorized modification or loss. It's about ensuring data is consistently accurate, complete, and, crucially, untampered.
How do you check that?
Well, consider a file integrity monitoring system. This technology is specifically designed to detect if an employee or, any unauthorized entity makes changes to critical information. If a crucial system file is altered even slightly, bang, the system flags it immediately.
Okay. And what about something like fault tolerance? Like having redundant hard drives? How does that tie into integrity? It sounds more like availability to me.
That's a really good point and a crucial distinction. While redundant hard drives absolutely boost availability, we'll get to, that they're also a form of integrity control. Think about it. If one hard drive fails,
the data's gone or corrupted.
Right, unless you have redundancy. The redundant drive ensures that the data isn't lost or corrupted due to hardware failure. This prevents accidental data loss or modification that would compromise the data's integrity. It ensures it remains accurate and complete.
Ah, I see. It prevents loss, which is a form of integrity failure.
Exactly. It's a proactive measure to prevent errors or failures from corrupting your data.
Which brings us neatly to the third pillar, availability. Data can be confidential, have integrity, but if you can't actually get to it when you need it, well, what good is it?
Exactly. Availability assures that information and services are accessible for use by authorized entities whenever they're required. And to circle back to our hard drive example, adding those redundant hard drives on a server also directly improves the availability of data. If one drive fails, the redundant drive takes over instantly, ideally, allowing continued, uninterrupted access to that data. The goal is to minimize downtime, keep critical services running for those who need them.
Okay, CIA, triad confidentiality, integrity, availability.
Mm.
Got it. So, if that's the cornerstone, what are some of the other essential security principles that kind of build upon it? Let's talk about accountability.
Accountability is simply the ability to trace actions taken on systems back to the individuals responsible. This is absolutely vital for security, for auditing, and especially for legal purposes later on.
How do you ensure that? Logs.
Logs are key. The most effective way is requiring authentication for all significant actions and capturing comprehensive logs centrally. When system access is recorded in a log, that becomes an auditable event.
Makes sense.
And what's fascinating, as our sources mention, is that if these logs are collected as part of a documented business process done regularly, they can even be admissible in court under the business records exception to the hearsay rule.
Wow. So it forms a really undeniable digital trail.
Potentially, yes, a very powerful tool.
Okay, how does non-repudiation fit in? This sounds like something, I don't know, out of a spy movie, making sure someone can't deny they did something.
It's precisely that, actually. Non-repudiation ensures that a party to a contract or a communication cannot deny the authenticity of their signature or the fact that they sent a message they originated.
Like a digital certified letter.
That's a great analogy. It proves delivery and content origin. Digital signatures are a prime example here. Also, things like hash-based message authentication codes, or HMAC, and even detailed audit trails contribute. They all help create cryptographic or verifiable proofs of origin and integrity.
That makes perfect sense. Now, what about least privilege? This seems like a really fundamental control to prevent, well, overreach.
It is, and it's absolutely critical. Least privilege simply means granting users only the most restrictive set of privileges necessary to perform their authorized job tasks. The idea is give them the lowest possible clearance required for their duties and absolutely nothing more.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Take Helen's scenario from our sources. She requires both an employee's manager and the accounting manager to approve administrative privileges in the accounting system. That isn't just least privilege, it's also a form of two-person control, adding another crucial layer of security. You need multiple approvals for high-risk access.
Right, two-person control, that leads right into segregation of duties, or SOD, which feels like maybe a twin concept of least privilege.
It's closely related, definitely, but distinct. Segregation of duties assigns responsibility for different parts of critical tasks to separate individuals. The goal is to prevent any single person from compromising a system or process end-to-end.
How does that work in practice?
Well, consider the embezzlement scheme mentioned at Doolittle Industries. An employee shifted funds for months undetected. With proper separation of duties, maybe one person initiates payments, another approves them. This could have been detected much, much earlier.
Okay.
This control is specifically designed to force collusion, meaning an operator might need to conspire with personnel from a different function to gain unauthorized access, making fraud significantly harder to pull off alone.
It's really clear that while technology is crucial, the human element is equally, if not more, important in cybersecurity. Let's maybe delve into that a bit. Part of that framework involves data classification. Can you explain why that's so vital?
Data classification, like Susan working with management to classify data in our example, is absolutely essential. It's the process of categorizing information based on its sensitivity, its value, its criticality to the business.
Why bother?
Because this classification then dictates the appropriate level of security controls that need to be applied. I mean, you wouldn't protect a public press release with the same rigor as, say, sensitive financial records or R&D secrets, right?
No, of course not.
So classification helps you allocate your security resources effectively and, well, smartly. Protect what matters most strongly.
That brings us to organizational documentation. This sounds like the actual blueprint for how security is implemented day to day. What are the different types we should know about?
You're right. It's the operational map, essentially. We generally break it down into 4 key types. First, there's a policy. This is a high-level document. It states the minimum level of security every system must meet. For instance, Yolanda preparing configuration information for minimum security, she's likely working based on a policy. It's the what and the why.
Okay, high level. What's next?
Then you have a baseline. This defines a minimum acceptable level of security configuration for a specific system type, like all Windows servers must have these specific settings.
More specific than a policy.
Correct. Then there's a guideline. These usually offer recommendations or best practices. They are often discretionary or optional controls, allowing for judgment based on context.
And the most detailed.
That would be the procedure. This is the most detailed type of document. It provides literal step-by-step instructions. It embodies all the detailed actions personnel are required to follow. This is the how-to guide that ensures consistent application of security measures.
So policies set the direction. Procedures give the specific steps. Got it. What about programs designed to get personnel, up to speed on security? There are different levels of programs, aren't there?
Yes, typically 3 distinct types for personnel. An awareness program is designed to establish a minimum standard of security understanding, kind of a common denominator across the entire organization. It's about making everyone generally mindful of security best practices, like spotting phishing emails.
Basic level.
Right. Then a training program goes deeper. It provides employees with the specific knowledge they need for their particular work tasks. This is much more tailored to job roles. Think security training for developers versus accountants.
Makes sense. And the highest level.
That's education. Education implies a broader, deeper understanding of security concepts, often more theoretical and comprehensive, extending beyond just specific tasks or tools. Think certifications or degrees in cybersecurity.
This all sounds like a lot of responsibility. Who ultimately shoulders the burden for ensuring all this security actually happens?
Yeah.
Seems like it has to come from the top.
It absolutely does. That falls squarely on management's crucial role. Specifically, senior management bears the primary responsibility for determining the level of protection needed for information systems resources. They are ultimately responsible for ensuring due diligence.
Due diligence. We hear that term a lot.
It's their legal and ethical obligation. Furthermore, the data or information owner, the person or department ultimately responsible for protecting specific information, is usually best suited to decide on adequate technical security controls based on that data's sensitivity and criticality. They understand its value best.
And you mentioned due diligence. What's the actual difference between due diligence and due care? They sound similar, but I gather the distinction is important, maybe legally.
It's extremely important, yes, because it often determines liability if something goes wrong. Due diligence is the act of investigating and understanding the risks a company faces beforehand. It involves developing and implementing policies, procedures, and standards based on that understanding. Think of it as identifying the right thing to do through proper investigation and planning.
So, failing to update a security policy would be a failure of due diligence.
Exactly. An outdated security policy, or maybe not taking mandatory 2-week vacations for critical staff, as required by policy, that indicates a failure to adequately assess or manage risk, which is diligence. Due care, on the other hand, is about implementing the countermeasures to provide protection from those identified threats. It's about doing the right thing consistently and actively maintaining the security level.
So, due care is the follow-through.
Precisely. So if an organization isn't applying the latest security patches as per their own defined process, that's a violation of due care. They're not doing what they know they should be doing. Conversely, installing the latest security patches as per the patch management process demonstrates due care. It's the continuous action of maintaining security based on what you've diligently identified as necessary.
Okay, so we've covered the foundational principles, the governance, the human element. Now, let's talk about the actual defenses, the controls in practice. Let's start with technical controls, the digital guardians. And what better place to begin than with firewalls, the classic network gatekeepers?
Firewalls are absolutely fundamental. Their primary purpose is to act as security checkpoints, usually at network boundaries. They centralize security services and inspect packets passing through.
They always sound like they slow things down. Bottlenecks.
They certainly can create bottlenecks, yes, because all traffic has to pass through them. But modern firewalls are incredibly efficient. Often, given typical external connection speeds, the latency they add is almost transparent, almost unnoticeable to the user.
Okay. Now, firewalls seem like simple gates, maybe, but they've evolved so much, haven't they? What's maybe the biggest leap in their capability that most people might not realize?
I think the real game changer is how deep they can inspect traffic now. Early ones, like a basic packet filtering firewall, just check the address on the packet, essentially source and destination IPs, ports. Very simple, stateless.
Right.
But modern ones, especially things like web application firewalls or WFs, can actually read the letter inside, so to speak. They look for specific malicious commands or patterns within the application traffic itself, like within the HTTP protocol.
So they understand the application's language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between a bouncer just checking IDs at the door versus a security expert inside analyzing conversations to detect threats. That deep inspection is what protects web servers from attacks like SQL injection or cross-site scripting. They sit in front of the web server specifically for this.
That's a huge difference. So when we talk about firewall rules, what kind of packets should a well-configured firewall definitely be blocking to keep us safe?
There are some standard best practices. A firewall should generally block inbound packets that have the source routing option set.
Right.
That's often used in network mapping or intrusion attempts. Okay. It should also definitely drop inbound packets that appear to have an internal address as their source IP address. That's a classic sign of an IP spoofing attempt, someone pretending to be inside your network.
Makes sense. What shouldn't it drop?
Well, you wouldn't normally drop standard outbound packets with an external destination IP address. That's just normal internet traffic leaving your network.
That blocking internal source IPs from the outside,
Yeah.
that leads perfectly into the concept of a DMZ. Where does that fit into the network architecture? It sounds like a buffer zone.
It is exactly that, a buffer zone. The DMZ, or demilitarized zone, is a physical or logical subnetwork located right behind the first internet-facing firewall, but before your main internal network.
Okay, sandwiched in between.
Precisely. It's specifically designed to contain and expose an organization's external-facing services, things like your public web servers, DNS servers, email servers, to the untrusted internet.
Why put them there?
The purpose is to add an extra layer of security. If an attacker manages to compromise a server in the DMZ, say your web server.
They're still not inside your main network.
Correct. They haven't directly breached your internal local area network or LAN, where your sensitive databases and workstations likely reside. It's a critical buffer zone, protecting your most sensitive internal systems.
Okay, beyond firewalls, we also have intrusion detection systems, IDS, and intrusion prevention systems, IPS. What's the main distinction there, and why is it so critical for defenses?
The key distinction is really action versus observation. An IDS, an intrusion detection system, primarily detects suspicious activity, but it doesn't necessarily block it automatically. It's more like a silent alarm system. It tells you something bad might be happening based on its rules or analysis.
What kinds of IDS are there?
Well, we have knowledge-based IDCs, which are very common. They use a database of known attack signatures and system vulnerabilities to detect exploitation attempts. Does this traffic match a known bad pattern? We also distinguish by placement. Host-based IDCs, or HIDs, are implemented on individual computers, effective for detecting malicious activities on that specific host. Network-based IDCs, or NIDs, monitor traffic traversing a whole network segment.
So an IDS just raises a flag, basically, but an IPS takes it a step further.
Precisely. An IPS, an intrusion prevention system, is essentially an active IDS. It's automatically configured to take action to block suspected attacks while they are in progress.
So it intervenes.
Yes. It's not just sounding an alarm. It's taking immediate action to stop the threat based on its configuration. Think of the IDS as a security camera operator watching the feeds, and the IPS as the security guard who tackles the intruder the moment they're spotted trying to break in.
All right, so we've got our digital guardians, the firewalls, and IDS systems in place. But what about the physical world? Let's switch gears a bit to physical controls. These are about securing the actual environment itself. What are some of the basic elements we see around the perimeter?
Yeah, physical security is just as important. When we talk about the perimeter and access points, common physical security elements include things like fencing, maybe man-traps, those double-door systems, turnstiles, portals. They're all designed to control physical entry.
What about things like locks or badges?
It's often a point of confusion. Locks are definitely physical controls. Badges are primarily physical for identification purposes, although they can have technical components if they include a smart chip or RFID for authentication at a reader. But crucially, passwords are a technical or logical control, not physical, even though they secure access to physical devices sometimes.
Right, okay. And what about securing sensitive internal spaces like server rooms or, say, those dusty wiring closets? What are some non-obvious physical controls needed there?
Wiring closets are often overlooked but absolutely critical infrastructure points. They must not store flammable items for obvious reasons. They should ideally use door sensors to log entries for accountability, know of who went in when, and they must undergo regular inspections.
Location matters too, right?
Definitely. They shouldn't only be placed in areas monitored by security guards, for instance. Multiple layers of control are better. The internal environment needs to be controlled, not just the door.
Beyond fire safety, there's a whole array of devices designed to detect intruders physically. What's one of the most common types, and how does it work?
One of the most common and generally affordable are passive infrared PIR detectors. You see these everywhere. These devices detect changes in the ambient infrared radiation, essentially heat caused by a moving object, like a person walking into its field of view. They don't emit any energy themselves, they simply sense the heat signature.
Interesting. Any others that are maybe less common but clever?
Well, a capacitance detector is quite neat. It's often used for spot protection, protecting a specific object like a safe or a display case, usually within inches. It monitors an electrical field around the object and triggers an alarm if that field changes, indicating someone is trying to touch or move the protected item.
It sounds like a lot of thought goes into designing these physical spaces for security. I've also heard of something called CPTED. Can you explain that concept?
CPTED. Crime prevention through environmental design. It's a really fascinating discipline, actually. It focuses on designing physical environments, things like landscaping choices, building layouts, even the type and placement of lighting, to reduce crime by influencing human behavior.
How does that work?
It's about making a space inherently less attractive or difficult for criminal activity through smart design. Things like ensuring clear sight lines, eliminating hiding spots, using natural surveillance opportunities, controlling access points naturally through layout. It's shaping behavior through design.
Very cool. And finally, a very practical aspect of physical security is power supply protection. We often hear terms like spike or brownout thrown around. Can you quickly clarify these, and why should an organization care?
Understanding power fluctuations is absolutely critical, not just for physical security, but for basic system uptime and data integrity. They can cause data loss or serious equipment damage. So a spike is a momentary high voltage, like a sudden jolt. A surge is too much voltage, but for a longer period, a sustained overload.
Okay, too much power. What about too little?
Right. A sag, or sometimes called a dip, is not enough voltage, but just for a short period. And a brownout is not enough voltage for a long period, a sustained low power condition, like when the lights dim. Then you have faults, short interruptions, and blackouts, long interruptions.
And protecting against these is key.
Absolutely. Each requires different protective measures like uninterruptible power supplies, UPS, or surge protectors to maintain system availability and integrity through these power quality issues.
We've covered technical and physical controls, but all that tech doesn't run itself, does it? It sounds like the human element, the policies and procedures, administrative controls, are just as vital, maybe even more so.
Precisely. They're the organizational blueprint, the rules of the road that ensure all those technical and physical safeguards actually work as intended, and that people understand their role in the whole security chain.
What's a big administrative control in today's world?
A huge one, increasingly, is supply chain security. Chris's concern in our sources about newly acquired laptops possibly being modified with keyloggers before delivery really highlights this risk.
Before they even arrive.
Exactly. Organizations must focus their efforts not just on the end product, but on vendor contracts, vetting their entire supply chain, and having a secure post-purchase build and verification process. Don't just trust the original equipment manufacturer, OEM, implicitly. Malicious modifications, hardware or software, can happen at any stage before the product even reaches your loading dock. It's about ensuring integrity before it's even in your hands.
That's a scary thought. And how do organizations keep track of all their valuable assets, laptops, servers, data, to protect them effectively? That's where an asset management program comes in, right?
Exactly. An effective asset management program isn't just a list. It involves several stages. It starts with process planning, design, and initiation, then moves to inventory and licensing, where you identify and catalog all your assets. But crucially, there's the implementation assessment stage. This is where the specific controls to protect these assets from theft, loss, or compromise are actually selected and put into place based on their value and risk.
It's an ongoing cycle.
It has to be. An ongoing life cycle that ensures your defenses match the value and risk associated with your assets and that you know what you need to protect.
Okay, we've built up our defenses, physical and digital, and set the administrative rules. But none of it matters if we can't properly identify who's trying to get in and what they're allowed to do. So let's talk about the digital gateway. Access control and authentication. It all starts with establishing identity, right? And the common wisdom is using something you know, something you have, and something you are. Start with the classic. Something you know.
The most common something you know is, of course, a password, or maybe a PIN, or increasingly a passphrase. We all use them constantly, but their strength is absolutely crucial.
What makes a strong password, really?
Well, the best passwords, as our sources indicate, contain a good mixture. Upper and lowercase letters, alphabetic and numeric characters, and special characters. The example given was GM19ZA. Using common words or names, even with a number tacked on the end, makes them highly vulnerable to dictionary attacks or just brute force guessing. Complexity and length matter.
And what about how passwords are stored? I hear a lot about hashing. You mentioned it earlier. Why is that so important?
Hashing is absolutely fundamental for password security. The primary purpose of using one-way hashing for user passwords is to prevent anyone, even an administrator or an attacker, who steals the password file from reading the actual password directly.
So they only get the scrambled version.
Exactly. If a password database is compromised, the attacker ideally only gets the hash, not the plaintext password, making it much, much harder to crack and use elsewhere.
You also mentioned salting earlier with hashing. Can you explain that again? How does it boost security?
Right. Salting adds another critical layer. It involves adding a unique random value, the salt, to each user's password before it gets hashed.
Why do that?
Think about it. Without salting, if two users happen to choose the same simple password, like password123, their stored hash value in the database would be identical. An attacker could pre-calculate hashes for common passwords, that's a rainbow table, find a match, and instantly compromise all users with that same password. Salting prevents this. Because each user gets a unique salt, even the same password123 will result in a completely different hash for every user. It forces attackers to crack each password individually, making those pre-computed rainbow table attacks far less effective. It adds essential randomness.
Okay, that makes sense. Moving on to the next factor. Something you have for authentication. What are we looking at there typically?
This category usually involves physical objects like security tokens or smart cards. This is where multi-factor authentication, MFA, or specifically two-factor authentication, 2FA, really comes into play.
Combining factors.
Exactly. Combining two or more different authentication factors, like something you know, password, plus something you have, a token generating a code, or maybe something you are, biometrics, plus something you have, a smart card, provides much more robust authentication. It's a significant leap in security beyond just a single password, because even if one factor gets compromised, the attacker still needs the other factor.
Which leads us to the most personal factor, something you are, or biometrics. How does this work to verify identity? It seems futuristic, but it's pretty common now.
It is very common. Biometrics verifies identity by analyzing a unique personal attribute or behavior. Fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, voice patterns, even the way you type. It's crucial, though, to distinguish between two main uses.
Okay.
There's authentication, which is a one-to-one comparison. This is comparing a provided biometric like scanning your fingerprint on your phone to a single stored template associated with your claimed identity. It answers the question, are you who you say you are?
And the other use?
That's identification, which is a one-to-many search. This involves searching a database of biometric templates to identify an unknown individual from a crowd, like facial recognition being used in an airport or by law enforcement. It answers the question, who are you?
That distinction is important. Now, what about accuracy? Biometrics aren't perfect. I've heard about different error types.
Right. Biometric accuracy is critical, and understanding the errors is key. There are two main error types we measure. A type I error is also known as the false rejection rate, or FRR. This is when the system fails to recognize a legitimate, authorized user. It rejects you even though you are who you say you are. It's definitely annoying for the user.
Yeah, frustrating.
Then there's the type 2 error, known as the false acceptance rate, or FIR. This is when the system incorrectly accepts an imposter who should have been rejected. It grants access to unauthorized individuals. In most security contexts, this type 2 error, the false acceptance, is considered the most dangerous type of error as it directly leads to unauthorized access.
You want to minimize that FR especially.
Absolutely, though you often trade off between FR and FRR. Making a system harder for imposters to fool might also make it slightly more likely to reject legitimate users occasionally. Finding the right balance, often represented by the crossover error rate, CER, or equal error rate, ERR or FR equals FRR, is key. A lower CER indicates a more accurate system overall.
Okay, so once identity is established, maybe through MFA or biometrics, then comes authorization. This is about what a verified user is actually allowed to do, right? What's a classic example of how a system handles authorization?
A System Consulting and Access Control List, or ACL, is a prime example of an authorization process in action. Once your identity is verified, authentication, the system checks the ACL associated with the resource you're trying to access, say, a specific file or folder.
What does the ACL contain?
The ACL is basically a list of subjects, users or groups, who are authorized to access that specific object, and it details the level of authorization they have read, write, execute, delete, etc. They are object-bound. The list belongs to the object and says who can access this particular object. This contrasts with capability tables, which are subject-bound and list what the subject can access.
Beyond just passwords and ACLs, how do organizations truly decide philosophically what a verified user can actually do? It sounds like there are different models or philosophies on access control.
Exactly. There are several models, but the two ends of the spectrum are really discretionary access control, DAC, and mandatory access control, MAC. In D-Day, the owner of an object, usually the person who created it, has the discretion to grant access rights to other users. It's user-centric, common in systems like Windows or Linux for file sharing.
What's the downside?
The major problem with D-Day is control. A user who has been granted access can often further share that file or permission without the original owner's knowledge or explicit permission. This can lead to uncontrolled dissemination of sensitive information. It's generally suitable only for low-security environments.
Okay, so D-Day is flexible but risky. What's MSC?
MSC, or Mandatory Access Control, is the opposite. It's very rigid. Here, the system itself, or a central security administrator, enforces access control based on formal security policies and labels, not based on user discretion. Yes, every object, like a file, gets a sensitivity label, e.g. confidential, secret, top secret, and maybe categories. Every subject, user, gets a clearance level. The system then enforces rules based on these labels. For example, the simple security rule says you cannot read up, a user with secret clearance cannot read a top secret file. And the property, star property, says you generally cannot write down a secret user can't write data into a confidential file to prevent accidental leakage.
Very strict. Where is MA used?
It's common in military systems, intelligence agencies, or environments demanding extremely high levels of confidentiality and control. The old U.S. DoD Orange Book Standard, TCSCC, heavily focused on MA levels.
So DA is user-controlled, MA is system-controlled. Is there something in between or more common in businesses today?
Yes, absolutely. Most organizations today, especially larger ones, lean heavily into role-based access control, RBAC. This is technically a form of non-discretionary access control, NESEC, meaning rules aren't set by individual users. In RBAC, access is granted based on an individual's role or job title within the organization, not their specific identity.
How is that better?
It's incredibly useful, especially in environments with frequent personnel changes, promotions, transfers, people leaving. You assign permissions to roles like accountant, sales manager, system admin, and then you just assign users to those roles. They automatically inherit the necessary permissions. It makes managing access much more efficient, consistent, and scalable compared to assigning permissions individually to hundreds or thousands of users.
That makes a lot of sense for administration. Now, these models help determine who gets access. But what about managing the sheer volume of access-related events, like failed login attempts? How do organizations avoid getting completely overwhelmed by noise and focus on real threats?
That's where a concept called a clipping level comes in. It's essentially a baseline threshold established for violation activities, like failed login attempts. For example, maybe 3 failed attempts in 5 minutes is considered normal user error, but the 4th attempt triggers an alert.
So it filters out the minor stuff.
Exactly. Only after this predefined baseline, the clipping level, is exceeded, is a violation record actually generated or escalated. This helps security teams manage the massive quantity of raw security data and focus their attention on potentially serious issues rather than chasing down every single typo a user makes when logging in.
Makes sense for managing alerts. What about specific technologies for remote access authentication? If someone is dialing in or connecting over VPN, what's considered the most robust authentication system for a large organization these days?
Looking at the traditional protocols mentioned in our sources, the most robust remote access authentication system is often considered TACACS plus SDA. It's a proprietary Cisco enhancement, but widely respected.
What makes it robust?
Its key advantage over something like Radius is that TACACS Plus uses TCP, which is connection-oriented and more reliable, and it encrypts all the authentication information, the username, the authorization details, and the accounting data, not just the password.
And Radius doesn't.
Radius typically uses UDP, connectionless, and encrypts only the user's password. Other information, like the username and accounting data, is often sent in clear text, making it inherently more vulnerable to sniffing and analysis. So TACACS Plus provides significantly better confidentiality for the entire authentication exchange.
All right, let's shift focus now to the pathways themselves, the networks. We're taking a network security deep dive. First, let's cover the fundamental building blocks, network components and architectures, starting with the core devices we plug into.
Okay, the core network devices are essential to understand for security. You have hubs, which are the simplest, oldest type. They basically just repeat electrical signals out to all connected ports. Whatever comes in one port goes out all the others.
So everyone hears everything.
Pretty much. That makes sniffing intersecting network traffic incredibly easy on a hub. Thankfully, they're largely obsolete now. Switches are much more intelligent. They learn which device, by its MAC address, is connected to which physical port. So they limit traffic, sending packets only to the intended destination port.
That sounds much better for security.
Yeah.
Harder to sniff.
Much harder, yes. To sniff traffic on a switch network, you usually need special configuration on the switch, like port mirroring or span ports, or a physical network tap. Then you have routers. These operate at layer 3, the network layer. Their job is to connect different networks together, like your home network to the internet, and determine the optimal paths for packets to travel between networks. They also filter traffic using access control lists based on IP addresses and ports.
So hubs connect devices simply, switches connect devices intelligently within a network, and routers connect different networks.
Got it. And how do these individual components form a bigger picture?
Yeah.
A network architecture. A network architecture really encompasses the overall design. It includes the communications products, the services, the protocols, the physical layout, everything that ensures these various network components, devices, protocols, access methods work together reliably and hopefully securely. It's the blueprint for how the network functions as a whole system.
This brings us to inter-network trust architectures. How do different networks relate to each other in terms of trust? Because obviously, not all networks are created equal when it comes to security posture.
That's a absolutely crucial point in design. We often distinguish between different types of networks based on their inherent trust levels. The internet, obviously, is the global, public, inherently untrusted network. It's the Wild West. Assume anything out there could be hostile.
Right.
An intranet is an organization's internal private network. It's generally considered trusted, accessible only to authorized employees and internal systems.
Behind the main firewalls.
Exactly. Then you have an extranet. This is essentially an extension of an organization's intranet, designed to allow controlled access to specific external partners, customers, or suppliers. It's like a carefully managed bridge between your trusted internal network and a specific, known, somewhat trusted external party, often using VPNs or dedicated lines.
And what's a bastion host? Sounds fortified.
It is. A bastion host is a computer system that is specifically hardened and locked down because it's exposed to potential attack, often sitting in the DMZ or being directly accessible from an untrusted network. It's typically part of or protected by a firewall, and it's designed to be the only host, or one of very few, that is directly accessible from networks on the other side of the firewall. It serves as a strongly defended, sacrificial entry point for specific services like VPN termination or a proxy server.
Okay. What about the literal backbone of connectivity? The physical network media, the cables themselves. How do they differ from a security perspective? Does the type of wire matter?
Oh, the choice of physical media has significant security implications. Fiber optics, for example, transmit data using pulses of light. They are excellent for long distances, support very high bandwidth for voice, data, image, video, and crucially, they are very difficult to tap into without physically interrupting the light signal, which is usually detectable.
So inherently more secure against passive eavesdropping.
Considerably so. In contrast, radio systems, basically wireless networks like Wi-Fi, are inherently broadcast mediums. While convenient and generally cheaper for short distances, the signals travel through the air, making them much easier to intercept or tap into, requiring strong encryption like WPA2 or WPA3 for security.
And the common copper cables, like Ethernet cables.
Right. The most common is unshielded twisted pair, UTP cabling. Think standard Ethernet cables. Its category rating, like Category 5E or Cat6 for gigabit Ethernet, is determined largely by how tightly the pairs of copper wires inside are wound. The tighter the wind, the higher the rating, and the better its resistance against electrical interference and crosstalk from adjacent pairs. This improved signal integrity also makes it slightly harder to passively tap compared to older, looser standards, but it's still fundamentally vulnerable to physical tapping compared to fiber.
So once we have the physical connection sorted, how do devices actually communicate across them? That's where key network protocols and services come in. When we talk about how networks actually communicate, we often hear about the TCP/IP model versus the OSI model. How does that framework help us understand network security without getting totally lost in the weeds of every single layer?
Think of these models as simplified blueprints for a very complex process. While the OSI model has 7 distinct layers, which is useful conceptually, the TCP/IP model is more practical and groups functions into 4 broader layers: application, host-to-host, which maps to OSI's transport layer, internet, mapping to OSI's network layer, and network access, mapping to OSI's data link and physical layers.
Why is that mapping useful for security?
The key takeaway for security is that it helps us understand which devices and protocols operate at what level, so we know where to place our defenses most effectively. For instance, a standard network firewall operates mainly at the internet and host-to-host layers 3 and 4, dealing with IP addresses and ports. An application firewall, or LAF, operates higher up at the application layer. Understanding this mapping helps us choose and place the right security controls. For example, knowing TCP operates at the host-to-host layer helps understand how stateful firewalls track connections.
Okay, that clarifies the layers. What about some common network protocols that power our daily digital interactions? Which ones are particularly relevant or maybe vulnerable from a security standpoint?
Several are absolutely critical to understand from a security perspective. DNS, domain name system, translates those human-readable website names like google.com into numerical IP addresses computers use. It's fundamental, but also a frequent target for attacks like DNS poisoning or spoofing to redirect users to malicious sites.
Right.
ARP, Address Resolution Protocol, works locally within a network segment. It matches an IP address to a physical hardware MAC address, so a packet can be delivered to the correct machine on the local link. However, as our sources note, it's very vulnerable to ARP poisoning. An attacker on the same local network can send fake ARP replies to trick other computers into sending traffic through the attacker's machine, a classic man-in-the-middle attack vector.
Nasty. What else?
For secure remote administration, SSH Secure Shell is crucial. It's the secure, encrypted replacement for the old, insecure Telnet protocol for running commands on remote servers. Always use SSH, never Telnet over untrusted networks. Then there's IPsec, Internet Protocol Security. This is a suite of protocols designed to provide security right at the network layer, layer 3, for all IP traffic, often used for VPNs.
What does IPsec provide?
Its core components are authentication header, for integrity and origin authentication, and ESP, encapsulating security payload, which provides confidentiality, encryption, as well as data origin authentication and integrity. While IPsec provides protection against replay attacks, preventing captured packets from being resent, it's important to note it does not inherently ensure that data is delivered in the exact order in which it was sent, but it's a powerful toolkit for securing IP communications.
That's a huge amount of traffic and interaction happening constantly. And where there's interaction, there are bound to be network attacks and defenses. How do we generally categorize these attacks?
We broadly categorize them into passive attacks, which primarily aim to gather information without altering system resources, affecting confidentiality, and active attacks, which attempt to alter system resources or affect their operation, impacting integrity and availability.
Okay, so what falls under passive attacks?
Passive attacks include sniffing or packet capture. This is just intercepting and reading network traffic. As we said, on old hubs, it was easy because traffic was broadcast everywhere. On modern switches, it usually requires special configuration on the switch itself or a physical network tap device which splits the signal. Crucially, even encrypted traffic, like from a VPN or HTTPS website, can be captured by sniffing, though the content itself remains unreadable without the decryption key. Another simple one is shoulder surfing, literally observing someone's private information directly, like their password or PIN, by looking over their shoulder. Low tech, but still effective.
So passive attacks are more about eavesdropping or information gathering. What about active attacks that actually do harm or change things?
Right. Active attacks are about modification or disruption. Data diddling is the unauthorized alteration of existing data before or during input into a system. This is definitely an active attack, often prevented by strong access controls, separation of duties, input validation, and auditing. Spoofing involves forging an address or identity to disguise the origin of communication or impersonate another system.
Like pretending to be someone else online.
Exactly. A common type is IP spoofing, where the attacker modifies the source IP address in packet headers to make the traffic appear as if it came from a trusted internal machine, hoping to bypass firewall rules or gain access. A particularly nasty variant is the Smurf attack. Here, an attacker sends a PNG request, an ICMP echo packet, to a network's broadcast address, but spoofs the source IP to be the victim's IP address.
What happens then?
All the devices on that intermediary network respond to the PNG, but they send their replies to the victim, the spoofed source. This amplifies the traffic massively, potentially overwhelming the victim's machine or network connection, a classic distributed denial of service DDoS amplification attack.
Wow. Speaking of denial of service, DOMS attacks, what are some other common ways attackers try to make systems unavailable?
There are many variations. The SYN flood attack exploits the TCP handshake process. The attacker sends a flood of connection requests, SYN packets, but never completes the handshake. This ties up the server's resources waiting for responses that never come, potentially exhausting its capacity to handle legitimate connections. The teardrop attack involves sending fragmented IP packets with overlapping or nonsensical offset values in the headers. This can confuse the reassembly process on the target system, potentially causing it to crash. Even just oversubscription of backbone traffic, intentionally flooding network links with too much data, can lead to a denial of service for legitimate users.
And what about covert channels? That sounds sneaky.
It is. Covert channels are unintended communication paths that allow information to be transferred in a way that bypasses normal security controls or monitoring. They often arise due to development oversight, improper implementation of access controls, or the misuse of shared system resources. It's like finding a secret way to pass notes in class that the teacher doesn't know about, allowing unauthorized information flow. Detecting them can be very difficult.
Beyond these network-specific attacks, there are also broader categories like malware and social engineering. Malware categories can feel a bit like a confusing alphabet soup sometimes. What's the most crucial distinction, say, between a worm and a virus that genuinely impacts how we defend against them?
I think the key distinction is really about self-sufficiency and propagation. A worm is a standalone malicious program that can replicate itself and spread independently across a network, often exploiting vulnerabilities without needing human interaction or attaching to another file. Worms primarily consume bandwidth and resources, like the infamous SQL Slammer worm did. They spread themselves.
And a virus.
A virus, on the other hand, is more like a digital parasite. It needs a host program or file to attach itself to. It spreads when that infected host file is executed or opened, often corrupting or modifying other files in the process. It relies on some action, often by a user, to propagate.
So the defense strategy differs.
Significantly. Defending against worms heavily relies on network segmentation, prompt patching of vulnerabilities, and network-based intrusion detection prevention. Defending against viruses relies more on endpoint security, antivirus software, file integrity monitoring, and, critically, user awareness and training to avoid executing infected files or macros.
And finally, the human factor again. Social engineering. This is less about exploiting code vulnerabilities and more about exploiting human psychology, isn't it?
Precisely. Social engineering involves manipulating individuals into divulging confidential information or performing actions that compromise security. It plays on trust, urgency, authority, or curiosity.
What's a common technique?
A classic example mentioned is masquerading attacks. This is where an attacker impersonates a trusted individual or entity to deliver malicious content or trick someone. The infamous I Love You and Melissa viruses, for instance, were incredibly successful because they arrived in emails that appeared to come from a known contact masquerading as a trusted sender. This tricked recipients into opening infected attachments they otherwise might have ignored. It exploits trust rather than purely technical flaws, proving again that the human element is often the weakest link.
Okay, let's move to one of the most fascinating and maybe often misunderstood areas of cybersecurity: cryptography fundamentals. It almost feels like magic sometimes, turning readable information into what looks like unbreakable code. Let's start with a core concept: hashing. What exactly is it, and what's its primary purpose in security?
Hashing is a fundamental cryptographic tool, but it's not encryption. It's a one-way function. It takes any input data, what we call a message, which could be anything from a password to an entire file, and produces a fixed-length output, a condensed representation called a message digest, or hash value.
One way being the key.
Absolutely. The key properties are: it's computationally infeasible to reverse the hash to get the original message, and it's also computationally infeasible to find two different messages that produce the exact same hash value. This is called collision resistance. Its primary purpose in security is integrity.
How does it ensure integrity?
Because if even a single bit in the original message changes, the resulting hash value will be completely different. So you can hash a file when you create it, store the hash securely, and then later rehash the file and compare the new hash to the stored one. If they match, you know the file hasn't been altered.
Are all hash functions equal? You mentioned MD5 earlier.
No, definitely not. A common example is MD5, which produces a 128-bit message digest. While it was widely used for years, MD5 is now considered cryptographically broken. It is not collision resistant anymore. Researchers have found practical ways to create two different inputs that produce the same MD5 hash. This makes it unsuitable for security applications like verifying software integrity or digital signatures where collision resistance is critical.
So what should be used instead?
Stronger alternatives are readily available, primarily from the SHA secure hash algorithm family. SHA-1 is also being phased out due to discovered weaknesses, but SHA-2, SHA-256, SHA-512, and the newer SHA-3 are considered secure for current integrity needs.
You mentioned salting again earlier, specifically for passwords. How does that relate to hashing in general? Is it used elsewhere?
Salting is primarily associated with password hashing, but the principle of adding randomness can apply elsewhere. As we discussed, for passwords, adding that unique random salt to each password before hashing makes pre-computed rainbow table attacks much less effective. It ensures identical passwords hash to different values if they have different salts.
Right, defeating the pre-computation.
Exactly. It forces attackers into much slower per-password cracking attempts rather than quick lookups.
So when we talk about cryptography as a whole discipline, what are its main goals? What problems is it trying to solve?
Cryptography's primary goals are generally considered to be addressing confidentiality, keeping information secret through encryption; integrity, ensuring information hasn't been tampered with, often using hashes and digital signatures; and authenticity, verifying the origin or identity of the sender, again using things like digital signatures or MAs. Some might also include non-repudiation as a key goal derived from authenticity and integrity.
Okay, let's get to the core of making things secret: encryption. What's the fundamental difference between symmetric key and asymmetric key cryptography? This seems crucial.
It is a fundamental distinction, yes. It really boils down to the number of keys used and how they are managed. Symmetric key cryptography, sometimes called secret key cryptography, uses the exact same key for both encryption and decryption.
One key does both jobs.
Right. This single key must be kept absolutely secret and shared securely only between the communicating parties. The advantage is that symmetric algorithms like AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, which is the current standard, replacing older ones like DES and triple DES, are very fast and efficient, especially for encrypting large amounts of data.
What's the catch?
The biggest challenge is secure key distribution. How do you get that shared secret key to the other party without anyone else intercepting it? And if you need to communicate securely with many different people, you need a separate shared key with each one, which becomes a key management nightmare.
Are there systems that rely purely on symmetric keys?
Yes, our sources highlight Kerberos as a prime example. It's a widely used network authentication protocol, often found in Windows Active Directory. Kerberos is a trusted, credential-based, third-party authentication system that relies exclusively on symmetric key cryptography. It uses a central key distribution center, KDC, to issue encrypted tickets, like ticket-granting tickets, TGTs, that that clients use to prove their identity to services, all based on shared symmetric keys.
And how does Kerberos handle things like replay attacks?
Kerberos specifically uses timestamps embedded within its encrypted messages to protect against replay attacks, where an attacker records valid authentication packets and tries to resend them later. If the timestamp is too old, the message is rejected. It does not use public key cryptography at all.
Okay, so symmetric is fast, but has key distribution challenges. What about asymmetric key, public key cryptography? It sounds more complex, maybe solves that key problem.
It is more complex computationally, but it elegantly solves the key distribution problem. Asymmetric cryptography uses a pair of mathematically linked keys for each user. A public key, which can be freely shared with anyone, and a private key, which must be kept absolutely secret by its owner.
Two keys. How do they work together?
They have a special relationship. For encryption, ensuring confidentiality, data encrypted with someone's public key can only be decrypted by their corresponding private key. So, anyone can encrypt a message for you using your public key, but only you, with your secret private key, can read it. This solves the key exchange issue. You just need to get the recipient's public key securely.
And the other use, signatures.
Exactly. For digital signatures, ensuring authenticity and non-repudiation, data signed or encrypted with the sender's private key can be verified by anyone using the sender's corresponding public key. This proves that the message must have come from the owner of that private key and that it hasn't been tampered with since it was signed.
What are some examples of asymmetric algorithms?
Common examples include RSA, widely used for both encryption and signatures, Diffie-Hellman, primarily for key exchange, and elliptic curve cryptosystem, ECC, which offers similar security levels to RSA but with much shorter key lengths, making it efficient for mobile devices and constrained environments.
Okay, so symmetric is fast for bulk data encryption. Asymmetric is great for secure key exchange and digital signatures. How do we get the best of both worlds in practice? Do systems combine them?
Absolutely, that's very common. Hybrid encryption schemes are used all the time precisely to leverage the strengths of both. They combine the efficiency of symmetric encryption for the bulk data with the convenience of asymmetric encryption for key management and signatures.
Can you give an example?
A perfect example is SIME, Secure Multipurpose Internet Mail Extensions, which is widely used for securing email exchanges. Here's how it typically works. SBIME encrypts the actual email message content using a fast symmetric session key, a temporary key generated just for this message. Then, that symmetric session key itself is encrypted using the recipient's public key, asymmetric encryption. This encrypted session key is sent along with the symmetrically encrypted message.
So only the recipient can decrypt the session key.
Exactly. Only the recipient, using their private key, can decrypt the session key. Once they have the session key, they can quickly decrypt the bulk message content. Additionally, the sender usually also calculates a hash of the original message and encrypts that hash with their own private key, asymmetric, to create a digital signature.
So you get confidentiality from the symmetric part managed by the asymmetric part, plus authentication and non-repudiation from the signature.
Precisely. It's a very clever and efficient combination, widely used in secure email, SSL/TLS for websites, and many other protocols.
That makes perfect sense. Now let's talk a bit more about digital signatures and public key infrastructure, PKI. We touched on digital signatures, but can you reiterate exactly what a digital signature provides?
Sure. A digital signature, created using the sender's private key and verified with their public key, cryptographically provides several key security services. 1. Authenticity. It confirms the identity of the sender, the owner of the private key. 2. Integrity. It verifies that the message or document hasn't been altered since it was signed because the signature is based on a hash of the content. 3. Non-repudiation. The sender cannot credibly deny having sent the message as only they possess the private key needed to create that specific signature.
Okay, but how do I trust that a public key actually belongs to the person or organization it claims to? That seems like a weak link.
That's exactly the problem that public key infrastructure, PKI, is designed to solve. The core component of PKI that addresses this is the digital certificate.
So a digital certificate is related to a signature, but it's not the same thing, correct?
Correct. They work together, but they are different. A digital certificate, sometimes called a public key certificate or identity certificate, is essentially an electronic document. Its main purpose is to digitally bind a specific public key to a specific identity, like a person's name and email address, or an organization's name and website domain.
How does it do that binding?
The certificate contains the public key itself, Information about the identity of the key owner, the certificate's validity period, and other details. Crucially, the entire certificate is digitally signed by a trusted third party called a certification authority, CA, using the CA's own private key.
So the CA vouches for the link between the key and the identity.
Precisely. The CA is a trusted entity, like Let's Encrypt, DigiCert, etc., that is responsible for verifying the identity of the entity requesting the certificate before issuing it. When your browser receives a website certificate, it checks the CA's signature on that certificate using the CA's public key, which is usually pre-installed in your browser or OS. If the signature is valid, you can trust that the public key in the certificate genuinely belongs to the website named in the certificate.
What about the Registration Authority, RA? Where do they fit in?
The Registration Authority, RA, often acts as a front end for the CA. The RA is typically responsible for performing the actual identity verification checks on users or organizations requesting certificates before forwarding the validated request to the CA for formal issuance. They handle the registration and validation part of the process on behalf of the CA.
Okay, that clears up PKI. Now, you mentioned the one-time pad, OTP, earlier as theoretically unbreakable. Can you elaborate on why it's so secure but so impractical?
The one-time pad is fascinating because, if used correctly, it offers perfect secrecy. It's mathematically proven to be impossible to crack through cryptanalysis alone.
Why?
The security relies on very strict key requirements. 1. The key must be truly random, not pseudo-random, but perfectly unpredictable. 2. The key must be at least as long as the plaintext message being encrypted. 3. The key must never ever be reused, not even partially, for any other message. Each key bit is used exactly once. 4. The key must be kept absolutely secret and shared securely only between the sender and receiver. Encryption itself is simple. You typically XOR each bit or character of the plaintext with the corresponding bit or character from the keypad.
So what makes it impractical?
The key management is a nightmare. Imagine needing to securely generate, distribute, and store a unique random key that's the same size as every single email, file transfer, or message you ever want to send securely. For a 1 GB file, you need a 1 GB random keypad, used once and then destroyed. The logistical problems of key distribution and ensuring perfect randomness and single use prevent its widespread practical use, restricting it mainly to highly sensitive, low-bandwidth communication scenarios, historically in espionage.
It sounds like the ultimate theoretical weapon,
Yeah.
but its impracticality is its downfall. Are there any other ciphers or maybe older methods that try to get close to that level of unbreakability, even if they have their own weaknesses?
Well, related to the idea of using long, non-repeating keys is the running key cipher. This is a type of polyalphabetic substitution cipher where the key is derived from a long piece of text, like a passage from a book. The key doesn't repeat in a short cycle like simpler ciphers, making frequency analysis much harder. However, it's still vulnerable because the underlying key material, the book text, isn't truly random and has linguistic patterns that can potentially be exploited with enough ciphertext. It's much stronger than simple substitution, but nowhere near the security of a true one-time pad.
And last in this section, something that isn't actually encryption at all, but hiding things in plain sight. Steganography. What exactly is that?
Right, steganography is fundamentally different from cryptography. Cryptography aims to make a message unreadable to unauthorized parties, scrambling it. Steganography aims to conceal the very existence of the message. It's the art and science of hiding information within other, seemingly innocuous data.
Hiding in plain sight. How is it typically done?
A very common technique, especially with digital images or audio files, is least significant bit, LSB insertion. Digital data is made of bits, 0 and 1s. The least significant bit of a byte representing, say, a pixel's color value has the smallest impact on the overall color. You can replace the LSBs of many pixels in an image with the bits of your hidden message.
And you wouldn't notice the difference.
To the human eye, the changes are usually imperceptible. The image looks perfectly normal, but hidden within those subtle LSB changes is your secret message. Someone needs to know the message is there and how to extract it, which bits to look at. It's a form of security through obscurity, hiding the communication itself, unlike encryption, which hides the content, but the encrypted message itself is visible.
Fascinating. Okay, so even with the best defenses, encryption, and maybe even hidden messages, disruptions still strike. Systems fail, attacks get through. So let's move into when disruption strikes. Incident response and recovery. It all starts with the incident response lifecycle. What are the key phases involved when something bad is detected, and what's the absolute most critical first step?
The incident response lifecycle provides a structured approach to handling security incidents. It typically involves several distinct phases, though the exact names might vary slightly. It begins with the detection. This is simply identifying that a security incident is potentially in progress or has occurred. This could come from anywhere. An IDS alert, unusual system behavior noticed by a user, malware beaconing detected by network monitoring, an unauthorized vulnerability scan report, or even just suspicious system access recorded in a log file.
Okay, so you've detected something's wrong. What's the immediate priority?
Once an incident is detected and confirmed, the highest priority action is almost always containment. The goal here is to limit the damage and prevent the incident from spreading further. Think of it like containing a fire, stop it from engulfing more systems or data. This might involve isolating affected systems from the network, disabling compromised accounts, or blocking malicious IP addresses at the firewall. You need to stop the bleeding immediately before you worry about fixing the cause.
Makes sense. Stop the spread first. After containment, what comes next in the life cycle?
Following successful containment, the next phase is typically eradication. This involves identifying and removing the root cause of the incident. That could mean getting rid of the malware completely, patching the vulnerability that was exploited, rebuilding a compromised system from a known good state, or correcting the misconfiguration that allowed the incident. You have to eliminate the actual threat.
Get rid of the bad stuff.
Then comes recovery. This is where affected systems and services are carefully restored to normal operation. This often involves restoring data from clean backups, verifying system integrity, and monitoring closely to ensure the threat is truly gone and systems are stable.
And it doesn't end there, right? There's follow-up.
Absolutely not. The final phase is post-incident activities, sometimes called lessons learned. This includes validation efforts to confirm everything is clean and functioning correctly, detailed analysis of the incident, what happened, how, why, what was the impact, and comprehensive reporting. Tools like John the Ripper might be used here for password security testing if compromised credentials were involved, or EXIF tool to analyze metadata from image files if they were part of the incident. The goal is to learn from the incident to improve defenses and prevent recurrence.
A critical part of incident response, especially if legal action might be involved, is evidence handling, or digital forensics. Why is the chain of custody so incredibly important here?
The chain of custody is absolutely critical for any digital evidence that might be used in court or even just for internal disciplinary action. It's the meticulous chronological documentation trail that shows the who, what, when, where, and how of evidence handling.
From start to finish.
From the moment the evidence is first identified and collected, through all subsequent analysis, storage, and transfer, right up until its final disposition, destruction, or archiving. Any gap or inconsistency in this chain, any point where the evidence was unaccounted for or could have been tampered with, can cast serious doubt on its integrity and potentially render it inadmissible or unreliable. It requires a formal, well-documented process, with signatures and dates at every step, with absolutely no exceptions allowed.
And how do investigators ensure the integrity of the digital evidence itself hasn't been compromised during collection or analysis?
The standard method is using cryptographic hashes. Before collecting data from a hard drive, for instance, you might calculate a hash, like SHA-256 of the entire drive. Then you make a bit-by-bit image or copy of the drive. After copying, you hash the copy. If the hash of the copy matches the hash of the original, you have strong assurance that the copy is exact and unaltered. You work only on the copy, the working image, preserving the original evidence. Hashes are used similarly to verify the integrity of specific files collected as evidence. If the hash ever changes, it means the evidence has been tampered with since it was collected and hashed.
When collecting evidence from a live system, is there a particular order of prioritization? What should investigators try to grab first before it disappears?
Yes, absolutely. There's a concept called the order of volatility. You must always strive to collect the most volatile evidence before the least volatile or persistent evidence.
What's volatile evidence?
Volatile evidence is data that will disappear or change rapidly if the system is shut down, rebooted, or even just left running. This includes things like the contents of RAM, system memory, running processes, active network connections, temporary system files, current logged-on users, the system time. You need specialized tools and techniques to capture this live data first.
And persistent evidence.
Persistent evidence is data stored on non-volatile media like hard drives, SSDs, or USB drives. This data will generally remain even after the system is powered off. So the priority is capture the fleeting volatile data first, then move on to acquiring images of the persistent storage media.
Okay, shifting slightly. What about legal considerations during an investigation? Can an organization just conduct its own internal investigation whenever it suspects something, or does it need to involve law enforcement right away?
That's a complex area, often depending on jurisdiction, regulations, and company policy. However, generally speaking, an organization can often conduct its own internal investigation first, particularly for incidents that don't immediately appear to involve serious crimes or legally mandated reporting requirements, like certain data breaches. Our sources suggest an organization can proceed if it has appropriate internal authorization, e.g. permission from a supervisor or legal counsel. The system involved doesn't contain specific types of regulated information that trigger mandatory external reporting, and, crucially, the company policy explicitly allows for monitoring and examination of company systems, hard disks, and network data.
So policy is key.
Policy and legal counsel are key. Importantly, our sources confirm that there is generally no legal requirement to contact law enforcement before beginning a preliminary internal investigation. However, it's vital to have well-defined internal procedures and ensure investigators are trained to handle evidence properly to avoid contaminating it should law enforcement need to get involved later.
You mentioned log files as potential evidence earlier. Are they always admissible in court? I remember you mentioning the hearsay rule.
Right, that's a critical legal point. Computer-generated records like system logs or audit trails are technically considered hearsay in many legal systems because they are out-of-court statements offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and the declarant, the computer, can't be cross-examined.
So how do they get admitted?
They can often be admitted under a specific exception to the hearsay rule, commonly known as the business records exception. To qualify, the organization typically needs to demonstrate several things. 1. The records were created and kept during the regularly conducted course of business activity. 2. It was the regular practice of that business activity to make such records. 3. The records were made at or near the time of the event by, or from information transmitted by, someone with knowledge. 4. The records were generated automatically by the computer system itself. 5. Crucially, it must be proven that the computer system was operating correctly at the time and that there are procedures in place to ensure the records haven't been altered. It needs to be part of a documented, routine business process, not just ad hoc data collection someone decided to do. Logs collected randomly by senior management might not meet the standard if it wasn't part of a regular documented process.
That's a high bar. Okay, beyond immediate incident response for specific events, organizations need broader plans for when major disruptions strike things that take out the whole office or data center. Let's talk about business continuity and disaster recovery planning. What's the big picture goal here?
The big picture overarching goal is about sustaining operations through adversity. But there are important distinctions between the different types of plans. A business continuity plan, BCP, is the broadest. It focuses on sustaining an organization's critical business functions during and after a disruption. It looks at the whole business process, sales, manufacturing, customer service, and figures out how to keep them running, perhaps at a reduced capacity. IT systems are considered within the BCP, but only in terms of their direct support to those larger business processes.
So BCP is about the business functions. What about disaster recovery?
A disaster recovery plan, DRP, is typically narrower in scope and more IT-focused. It applies specifically to major, usually catastrophic events that deny access to the primary facility or systems for an extended period. Think fire, flood, major cyber attack taking down the data center. The DRP details the steps to recover the IT infrastructure and services, often at an alternate site. An organization might not even need a formal DRP if it has no critical processing areas or systems that absolutely require continuous operation even during a disaster. DRP planning includes steps taken before, during, and after the disaster hits.
Are there other related plans?
Yes, sometimes you'll hear about a business recovery plan, BRP, which usually addresses the restoration of business processes after an emergency, but might lack procedures to ensure continuity throughout the emergency itself.
No.
And a continuity of operations plan, COP, often focuses on restoring essential government functions at an alternate site for a limited period, for example, up to 30 days, before returning to normal operations, common in public sector planning.
When making these plans, BCP or DRP, what are some of the key planning metrics they use? How do they measure what level of recovery is needed or acceptable?
There are a couple of absolutely crucial metrics. RTO, Recovery Time Objective. This defines the maximum acceptable amount of time that a particular IT service or business function can be down or unavailable following a disruption before causing serious, unacceptable damage to the business operations. It answers the question, how quickly must we recover?
So mission-critical services have very short RTOs.
Exactly. Maybe minutes or hours. Less critical services might have RTOs of days or even weeks. Closely related is MTD, maximum tolerable downtime, which is often used interchangeably or represents the absolute ceiling beyond the RTO. The other key metric is RPO, recovery point objective.
What does RPO measure?
RPO defines the maximum acceptable amount of data loss from the point of disruption backwards in time. It essentially dictates how frequently you need to back up your data. If your RPO is 1 hour, it means you can only afford to lose up to 1 hour's worth of data transactions. It answers the question, how much data can we afford to lose? RTO and RPO together drive the requirements for recovery strategies and technologies.
If the primary site is completely knocked out by a disaster, where do organizations actually go to recover? What are the main types of alternate recovery sites?
There are 3 main tiers of alternate recovery sites offering different balances of cost, readiness, and recovery speed. The most basic is a cold site. This is essentially an empty, prepared space. It's a permanent location with adequate floor space and basic infrastructure power, cooling, telecommunications hookups, but no pre-installed computer hardware or software.
So you have to bring everything.
Yes, you have to ship in and install all your servers, network gear, load your software and data from backups. It is the cheapest option up front, but it takes the most time to recover, typically days or even 1 to 2 weeks. The main benefit, besides cost, is usually no resource contention. You're not sharing it with other companies potentially affected by the same disaster.
Okay, that's called what's warmer.
A warm site is the middle ground. It's a partially equipped office space. It usually has some hardware, maybe servers and network gear, though perhaps not fully configured for you, software, power, and communication lines already installed. Recovery is faster than a hold site, maybe taking a day or several days, but still requires significant effort to load your specific applications and data and get fully operational.
And the fastest option?
That's a hot site. This is a fully configured duplicate facility. It has all the necessary hardware, compatible systems, network connectivity, infrastructure, and sometimes even personnel workspaces, ready for immediate or near immediate use. Data might be mirrored or frequently replicated to the hot site. It's the most expensive option by far, but offers the fastest recovery time, potentially within minutes or hours of declaring a disaster.
Finally, how do organizations make sure these expensive and complex disaster recovery plans actually work when needed? They have to test disaster recovery plans, right?
Testing is absolutely crucial. A plan that hasn't been tested is just a paperweight. There are several levels of testing. You might start with a simple checklist test, reviewing the plan steps, or a structured walkthrough test where team members talk through their roles on paper. A simulation test goes further, testing personnel's ability to respond to a simulated disaster scenario, maybe involving mock alerts or communication drills, but no actual systems are recovered or moved.
What about tests that involve actual recovery?
That's where you get into operational tests. A very common and practical method is the parallel test. In this test, the recovery systems at the alternate site are brought up and run in parallel with the live production systems at the primary site. Test data or transactions are processed on the recovery systems, and the results are compared to the live systems. This is performed without interrupting the current primary processing, making it the most common type of DRP testing because it verifies capability with relatively low risk to ongoing operations.
And the ultimate test?
The ultimate, most comprehensive test is the full interruption test. This is where primary production processing at the main site actually stops and operations are fully failed over to the recovery site. It's the only way to be absolutely sure everything works end-to-end under real pressure. However, it carries the highest risk and business impact, so it's usually performed infrequently, and only after successfully completing multiple parallel tests to build confidence.
Okay, we've talked a lot about threats, vulnerabilities, controls, and recovery. But let's distill it all down to the core concept that drives security decisions: understanding risk, assessment, and mitigation. First off, how do we actually define risk in cybersecurity? What does risk really mean in this context?
It's a fundamental concept. At its core, risk in cybersecurity is the potential for harm or loss to an information system, network, or the data they hold. It's essentially the probability or likelihood that a threat will successfully exploit a vulnerability, resulting in some negative impact or consequence. It's not just the threat itself, nor just the vulnerability, but the combination.
Okay, so you need both a threat and a vulnerability. Can you break those down? What's a threat versus a vulnerability?
Sure. A threat, or threat agent source, is any circumstance, event, or actor with the potential to cause harm. This could be a malicious hacker attempting to break in, a natural disaster like a flood, malware spreading, an employee making a mistake, or even a hardware failure. It's the potential cause of harm.
And the vulnerability.
A vulnerability is a flaw or weakness in the system itself that could be in the security policies, the procedures, personnel awareness or training, the hardware design, the software code, or even the physical facilities. It's an opening or weakness that a threat agent can exploit to actually cause the harm.
So it's the combination that creates the actual risk. A vulnerability without a threat doesn't matter.
Precisely. Risk truly exists only when a threat is coupled with a corresponding vulnerability that it can exploit. You might have a vulnerability in a piece of software, but if there's no known threat actor actively trying to exploit it, the immediate risk might be low, though it should still be fixed. Conversely, a potent threat like ransomware exists, but if your systems are perfectly patched, configured, and backed up, no vulnerabilities, the risk is minimized. Vulnerabilities don't cause harm on their own, but they leave the door open for threats to walk in. The combination of a credible threat and an exploitable vulnerability is what creates and increases risk.
When we talk about digital threats, our minds often jump to these shadowy external hackers, maybe state-sponsored groups. But I've heard there's a surprising, maybe uncomfortable truth about where most digital damage or computer crime losses actually originate. Is there an overlooked risk factor we should be paying more attention to?
It's often counterintuitive for people outside the field, but yes, our sources consistently point to employees' insiders as still being the leading source of computer crime losses, or at least a very significant factor.
Really? Still?
More than external hackers.
It depends on how you measure it. But insiders often have the advantage of legitimate access, knowledge of internal systems and weaknesses, and they can operate under the radar of perimeter security controls designed to keep outsiders out. Their actions, whether malicious or accidental, can often be harder to detect and sometimes more impactful than external attacks. It's why robust internal controls, least privilege, separation of duties, and insider threat monitoring programs are so absolutely critical for organizations. Don't just focus on the external wall, secure the inside too. That's sobering. Now, it sounds like businesses try to put a dollar value on these risks. How do they even begin to calculate what a potential breach or outage might cost them? It can't just be a wild guess, can it? That's where quantitative risk assessment comes in.
Exactly. Quantitative risk assessment attempts to assign objective monetary values to the components of risk, allowing for a cost-benefit analysis of security controls. It's not just guessing, it uses specific calculations.
What are the key calculations?
Two key metrics are fundamental. First, SLE, single loss expectancy. This represents the estimated financial loss from a single successful exploit of a specific threat against a specific asset. The formula is SLE equals asset value, exposure factor.
Exposure factor.
The exposure factor, EF, is the percentage of the asset's value that is expected to be lost if that specific threat successfully materializes. For example, if a server with $10,000 is destroyed by a fire threat, the EF might be 100%, so the SLE is $10,000. If a virus corrupts data requiring 10 hours of cleanup but 100 hours on a $5,000 database server, the SLE might be $1,000. EF yields 20%.
Okay, so SLE is the cost per incident. How do they figure out the yearly cost?
That's the second key metric, ALE, annualized loss expectancy. This estimates the expected monetary loss from a specific risk over the course of a full year. The formula is ALE equals SLE AROO.
ARO.
ARO is the annualized rate of occurrence. This is an estimate of how many times you expect that specific threat incident, the one causing the SLE, to occur in a single year. If a specific type of malware outbreak causing an SLE of $5,000 is expected to happen twice a year, ARO equals 2, then the ALE for that risk is $10,000, $5,000 to 2.
So ALE helps prioritize which risks cost the most over time.
Precisely. ALE allows you to compare different risks on a common financial scale and helps justify security spending. If a proposed security control costs $8,000 per year but is expected to reduce the ALE of a particular risk from $10,000 to $1,000, a benefit of $9,000, it's likely a cost-effective investment.
What are the challenges with quantitative assessment?
While powerful quantitative risk assessment has challenges, it requires a high volume of reliable information to accurately assign monetary values to assets and estimate occurrence rates, which can be difficult to obtain. It also requires significant experience and judgment to apply correctly. It's not as simple as plugging numbers into a formula if you don't understand the context. The calculations can also become quite complex for large organizations with many assets and threats, although automation can help.
So at the end of the day, security should be cost-effective then. It's about balancing protection and cost.
Absolutely. Computer security should primarily be cost-effective. It's rare for security investments to directly generate profit. Instead, they are typically viewed as loss prevention or risk reduction. Calculating things like return on security investment, ROSI, helps justify security budgets to management by showing how security spending reduces the potential financial losses represented by the ALE.
After doing all this risk assessment and putting mitigations in place, is there a final step?
Yes, a crucial step often recommended is performing an uncertainty analysis. After you've done your risk assessment and mitigation planning, this documented analysis explicitly acknowledges that risk management often relies on estimates, assumptions, and incomplete data. It highlights the level of confidence or uncertainty in the quantitative results, allowing decision makers to use the risk assessment findings knowledgeably, fully aware of their inherent limitations and potential variability.
Finally, related to risk assessment is vulnerability assessment. What are the typical vulnerability assessment outcomes? What practical information do you get out of performing one?
A vulnerability assessment is focused specifically on identifying the flaws or weaknesses in systems, applications, or procedures that are susceptible to attack or misuse.
What does it tell you?
The likely outcomes of a good vulnerability assessment include a list of identified vulnerabilities, often prioritized by severity, information that feeds into both quantitative loss assessment, understanding the potential financial impact if a vulnerability is exploited, and qualitative loss assessment, understanding the operational impact, like downtime or reputational damage. It also helps define critical support areas, identifying which systems have the most severe vulnerabilities and are most critical to the business, thus needing remediation attention first.
What's not a typical outcome?
What's unlikely to be a direct outcome of the vulnerability assessment itself is the formal approval of the business continuity plan scope and initiation document. While the vulnerability assessment findings certainly inform BCPDRP planning by highlighting critical systems and risks, the formal approval of the BCP scope is a separate, higher-level management decision and planning process step.
Wow. Okay. You've just navigated us through a really comprehensive deep dive into the complex world of information security. We've unpacked everything from those foundational principles, confidentiality, integrity, availability, right through the intricate workings of firewalls, encryption, access controls, and even the critical steps for responding when disaster strikes.
Hopefully, you now have a much more solid understanding of how organizations try to protect their most valuable assets, their data and systems, and importantly, how you can maybe think about these challenges too, applying some of these core principles even in your own digital life.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't just abstract theory. It really is the blueprint for protecting our digital lives and livelihoods in so many ways. By understanding these concepts, you're not just informed, you're genuinely more empowered to make better decisions.
Definitely. And thinking ahead, considering how rapidly technology and the threats themselves evolve, which single area of cybersecurity that we've discussed, whether it's maybe access controls with the AI, network defense against new protocols, cryptography in the quantum age, or incident response against automated attacks, which area do you believe will present the most significant and maybe unforeseen challenges in the next 5 to 10 years? And what new kind of deep dive will we all need to take just to keep up?